There's a good line for a scriptwriter here somewhere about heaving seas and heaving stomachs. And in this historical shot, you actually see Starling not eating, with food in plain sight.
We need one of these for the film, don't we? Look at that.
But his temporary abstinence has paid off. A beautiful wahoo, a nice end to a day of pretty hot fishing.
Thanks, Emma.
Steve's eating habits have become legendary throughout the fishing world. Wherever he goes, food shortages soon follow. Even those of us familiar enough with his appetites to know him as Steve Starving were stunned by the gastronomic excesses we witnessed on this trip. Learning that we were all happy to eat raw fish, Steve protected his own claim to 90% of the food supply by moving right along to eating live fish. He was quite right. Nobody challenged his right to eat all the live fish he wanted. Meanwhile, back at the Trevally patch, we had a visitor. Sharks were rare during the day, but every now and then an unusually aggressive little fellow would move right in. Throughout the whole trip, we stuck to the principle of releasing everything we had no use for. A few of the tuna were kept for burley. A lot of fish were eaten, but everything else went back where it came from, including the sharks. That evening, just for a change of pace, we fished Trevally. And for the first time, I became aware of a sort of strange, spooky atmosphere associated with this evening bite. The minute the light began to fade, the tempo of the bite would pick up. The fish were still there in the same numbers, but a frantic note of urgency became apparent. Baits were slammed harder than before, and the fight would be a completely out of control, panic-stricken series of killing runs. Then, a little later, you could look out the back of the boat, and right back on the extreme edge of vision, the first shadows could be seen moving. Shadows that moved a little closer all the time, until, with full dark, the water all around the boat would be thick with sharks. It was no wonder the Trevally were working themselves up into a pink fit. They knew very well what would come into this lagoon with the night. The sharks weren't the only things that got lit up at night. Philip was in his element, breaking his gear and his back on great black shadows that just kept right on going, like diesel trains leaving a station. This was to be our last day at the reef, and the weather was coming apart in a big way. But if nothing else around us was warm, at least the bite was red hot. The fish liked the weather, and Steve opened up the score and what was to be a sensational day with this king, a real low flyer on the shallow sand flats of the lagoon. Throughout the trip, Rod was working the fly rod every chance he got. He already has an impressive list of fly rod captures to his credit. Just the day before, he'd added this nice cod to that list. This Now it's time to introduce one of the lagoon trevally to the long wand. It doesn't take too long to find a taker, and the fight is on. The sound of any drag working under pressure is enough to get the adrenaline pumping, but fly lines and dacron burning up the guides can really get the spine tingling. Harrison's fly rod is a far cry from the fairy wands used to present the tups indispensable to a shy trout. It's a brute stick, a stump puller, and when it gets loaded all the way through to the reel seat, it applies killing pressure to a fish. When you see the way a relatively small fish can rampage against gear like this, you start to get some idea of just how hot this shallow water fishing really is.
He likes that top end of the boat, this bloke.
And there he is, a small fish by lagoon standards, but the fight has been out of all proportion to the size of the fish. A real challenge.
Good on you, Rodney.
By this time, certain things had become predictable. For instance, it was quite safe to predict that the weather would get worse each day. It was also safe to predict that there would be kings close to the reef, yellowfin further out. Then, generally speaking, the wider we went, the bigger the fish would get. We took a little time off on the way out to throw a few poppers at school kings. This has to be my favourite form of fishing, and the fish don't have to be big at all to provide plenty of kicks as they chase those bloopers across the top. Out beyond the kings, the yellowfin were on the job again. We ran on past the first strike, looking for the double, and there it goes.
I've got one on. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I lashed it when I pulled the lever back here. Clumsy boy. Shark on it. What do you got? A little yellowfin?
At the 39 fathom line, things really started to fire. The weather got worse, but the fishing just got better and better. Then suddenly, the sea exploded in our wake, and Philip's 80-pound reel began to unload line at an incredible rate. There would be no run on past this fish. We were tight on a marlin, and it looked like a good fish. Philip originally bought Santara to fish for marlin. In the time he's had it, he's hooked a number of billfish, some of them big fish. After short, long, and sometimes very long fights, he's run out of luck every time. Now it's on again. The beginning of a fight that might finish in seconds, or it might go on for so many hours that Phil could end up wishing he were anywhere else in the world except on this particular boat, on this particular day, fighting a fish that doesn't know when to quit. There's no way of knowing in advance where it's going to take you. You just fight as hard as you can, for as long as you can, and hope that's enough to bring you out on top. With the sort of luck he's had in the past, you have to wonder what's going through Philip's mind at a time like this. To complicate things, Phil has hooked the fish on 80-pound tackle, and the rod is a very hard 80. Far too much rod to be fighting standing for any length of time. At the end of the first hour, the fish is still wide and deep, running whenever he wants to, and Philip has hit the wall. It's time for a fighting chair. Phil's luck is only half in. We have just half a fighting chair on board. All we have is the seat. The rest of the chair is back at Lord Howe, along with a lot of other things that got unloaded to make room for supplies for the trip. But even half a chair is better than nothing. And literally using Steve and Rod's feet as footrests, Philip battles on into the second hour of the fight, and then on past that again. Finally, Steve gets his first look at the wire. Close, but not close enough. Nobody would like to see that wire in Steve's glove more than Philip. It doesn't end with spectacular leaps. It finishes tough, just like the rest of the fight. Fair hooked, but with the line tucked under a pectoral, the fish is almost impossible to lead. He wants to stay down, and time after time he comes close to the surface, only to slip back under the prop and rudder, where he's always within an inch of breaking free. Each time he does that, Philip dies inside just one more time. Then, one last pass, and it's finished. Steve gets his first touch of the wire, and it's done. There's hardly a kick left in the fish, or in Philip either for that matter. The fight went very close to a draw, a classic confrontation between man and a great wild fish. Philip has his fish at last, the one he wanted so much, a 360-pound blue marlin, a great climax to an extraordinary fishing trip. 200 sea miles to experience a fishing frontier, bad seas both ways, and the worst kind of weather in between. But we had caught the fish. There was a fish of some kind attached to a line from Santara for close on 50% of the time we were at Elizibeth Reef. You can't complain about action like that. But if the object of the exercise was to find a new ground that was better than anything else, we have to admit that we failed. Back at Lord Howe in the weeks that followed this trip, Santara boated more and bigger fish of every species than those we'd encountered at Elizabeth. Philip's dad went close to upstaging his marlin when he brought a huge fish to the side of a smaller boat. We'll never know the end of that story though, for the two men on board were unable to manhandle the fish alongside the boat. They had to release it. Whether it was the best, the second best, or something else altogether is of no consequence when we think of Elizabeth. We had to go there simply because we'd never seen it and fished it before. Maybe we were attracted by the fact of it being so hard to get to. Every fisherman understands that kind of thinking. And there's an Elizabeth Reef in every fisherman's world.